Guys, we're going to have a fun time with my friend Duwane Adams of Duwane Adams Hunting. Before we get to that, I want to thank you guys for the avid support that you give my podcast. It's just super loyal listeners, and I really appreciate that. I want to encourage you, if you don't subscribe to the podcast, do so. It's free to you. I know there's a lot of you that are listening that are not subscribing. All you have to do is just hit subscribe. It's no charge. There never will be a charge. It will always be free, but that helps us with our ranking on iTunes, so subscribe. Also, if you haven't left a review, please go and leave a review there on iTunes. That also helps us. Guys, I get messages from our sponsors of the podcast every day, how you guys have stepped up and really support the sponsors. I want to thank those sponsors. I want to thank GoHunt.com, the gear shop, my friend Cody Nelson, 20-plus years. I was actually in Cody Nelson's wedding. That's probably an interesting fact that you guys didn't know. Cody is the optics manager there at GoHunt. You can reach out and call him if you're interested in buying any optics at all, whether it be binos, spotting scopes, tripods, rifle scopes, range-finding binoculars, handheld rangefinders, whatever it may be in regards to optics. 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can also send him an email at optics@gohunt.com. I want to thank them for their sponsorship. I also want to remind you that the GoHunt Insider, the free trial ends here in 2 weeks. So go to gohunt.com/JScott, follow the prompts, and that's a free trial of the Insider. It's the best Western hunting resource out there. I want to thank KUIU Ultralight Hunting. To find out more about KUIU, you can go to kuiu.com. Thanks to KUIU. I also want to thank PhoneScope. That's PhoneScope with a K, phonescope.com. If you use the JScott19 promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount. That's the digiscoping device that I use on my iPhone 10. Through my binos and through my spotting scope, I'm able to take photos and video. Go to phonescope.com and save 10%. And then onxmaps.com. I use onX Maps every day, hunting, fishing, and in my real estate business. It's a great app on your phone. You can save 20% by going to onxmaps.com. Use the JScott19 promo code and save 20%. Guys, let's get right to this episode with Duwane Adams. Really appreciate your support. If you have any questions or comments of me, you can email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. You can also send me a direct message on my Instagram account. That's at jscottoutdoors. Guys, God bless. Let's get right to it. Guys, welcome to the podcast. I've got my friend Duwane Adams. Duwane is a longtime hunting guide in the state of Arizona for all different sorts of species, but you guys probably know Duwane from being on the podcast. He's written books. He is kind of known as the guy that started glassing with 15s off of a tripod and is a Coues deer master. Duwane, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jay. Praise God, doing really good.
That's awesome. We sit here about the 11th of October, and, all across the West, people are excited, especially in Arizona, with the, great winter moisture that we had and antler growth kicking off a great 2019 season. As we sit here at the beginning of October, your deer hunts are about to start, both for Coues and for mule deer up on the Kaibab, the early hunt and the late hunt. But before we get into that, the last time we talked, you were headed to, I believe, Unit 1 for 40-something, I think 41st year maybe of elk hunting in Unit 1. How was it up there?
Probably maybe the best year I think we ever had. Unbelievable growth. I had 10 clients. We killed 9 bulls, and 6 of them over 350. Wow. And the growth was just unbelievable. The hunting was unbelievable, and the rut was on from the time we got there, and it got better every day. The gentleman that didn't kill a bull shot at a half a dozen bulls, and he told me the last day, he said, Mr. Adams, it was absolutely the best hunt I've ever on in my life. And so that's what you want to hear, and that being a guide, even if they don't kill, if they have opportunities, it makes a tremendous difference. But we've seen some bulls that people had killed, and just unbelievable bulls. So praise God, it was one guy came in camp and he had a 390 and just stopped by and showed us he had killed, and he's just a regular person, and he didn't need a guide, and it was unbelievable bulls. And so I'm glad all the clients got to see that.
So Duwane, the heavy snows and the winter moisture that we got, you've already said it's probably the best year you've seen. So as far as antler growth, is it the best year you've ever seen up there?
In my opinion, it is. It's just unbelievable. And I mean mule deer and elk and coos deer and all of it. I mean, I'm just seeing in the coos deer, I'm seeing probably 10 to 15 points more, and the mule deer 20 to 25, and elk as much as 40. Just unbelievable than normal, because I mean, in Unit 1, a lot of those marshes that generally are dry at this time of year, they were still 100 yards across, Jay. They're 3 and 4 inches of water in it, so the elk had never suffered in any aspect.
A lot of the state, the guys that I've been talking to said, yeah, we had great spring and winter moisture, but the lack of monsoon, it was really, really dry across the state, and we'll talk about that when it comes to coos deer here in a minute. But as far as Unit 1 goes, did you feel that the summer monsoon was not up to par, or did it actually hit okay?
No, I think it did okay there. Unit 1 is a lot different, Jay, than other units because it's so high. It's 9,000 feet at Big Lake, and all across the plateau all the way into the reservation, it's so high. So those storms have a tendency to hit there. And I have an uncle lives in Pine Top, and he'll say, nephew, there was no rain, but I drove to Big Lake, and you just poured up there. So they get the rain there that they don't get elsewhere.
Towards the end of the rut, did you start seeing a lot of broken antlers, or was this one of those years that broken antlers weren't an issue at all?
Didn't have that problem this year, thank God. I'm sure after we left it was, because we got into 2 or 3 knockdown drag outs with bulls screaming everywhere, and we were in the middle of it. They were fighting like crazy, so you knew sooner or later that was going to happen. They were going to beat them up. But it was like you said, it was right at the end of the rut, the last 2 or 3 days, that craziness just took off. But we'd already killed all the elk and was down to that one hunter by that time.
Do you feel like the late hunt in that unit, with the antler growth being as good as it is, do you think it'll be a banner late season Unit 1 hunt?
I think so. I don't know why it wouldn't be. I don't have any idea why it wouldn't be. It should just be unbelievable, to be very honest with you, because the growth is phenomenal, and if they get any kind of weather and push any of those bulls out of the reservation, God, those guys might kill some gigantic bulls.
Let's shift a little bit to deer. We're kind of right on the, right at the start. I think there's some junior hunts kicking off this weekend. There are actually a couple of units I think have already had a few junior hunts. But tell us about your plans for this upcoming fall in regards to deer.
Well, we're going to start in the Kaibab here in 2 weeks, thank God. And then after that, we'll start on the coos deer. And I gave glassing lessons this morning that a young man from Yuma listened to you on this podcast, and you and I gave him lessons, and we seen 9 bucks this morning, and during the season, and that was, he said, this is the season, Duwane. I said, yeah, and there's people driving everywhere, but they're driving past a deer. I said, it's just that simple. And he got a tremendous education. We've seen 55 deer this morning in about 2 hours, and those 9 bucks.
Duwane, I've had a lot of people over the last couple of years that have heard you on the podcast and have come down and taken your glassing lessons. Talk a little bit about how a day of, glassing lessons go with you, and kind of, obviously they have to come take the lesson to get the full course, but, kind of what are you going over?
Well, Jay, most people look. I talk to it all the time about the angle of the dangle, and they giggle and laugh about that. But when I get done explaining to them what I'm talking about, then just like the gentleman today, he said, I understand what you mean now. You have to learn where to glass at what time of the day, and that's where the angle comes in. And as soon as the sun come up, I said, right there is where the deer are. But I said, if you start watching those deer, they're going to move to the northwest cuts. And I said, if you don't have that angle, you can never see those deer. So what I try to do is, and I did it this morning as well, is we seen those deer go over that hill, right? I say, yeah, let's drive around and find those deer. And so that's what we did with his son. We drove around. I said, those deer are right there now. Now, I said, that saddle's where they came over, but now we're on the northwest side, and it wasn't 2 seconds, and his boy found 2 bucks. He said, there they are, Dad, there they are. And I told the gentleman, I said, you see the difference? I said, this is the bed, and that's the food. And most people never understand that. So they could be good glassers, and a lot of the people that come to glassing lessons that you have sent me are good glassers, Jay. They just look at the wrong place at the wrong time. And they keep looking at those open hillsides, 9, 10, 11, 1 o'clock, and there are no deer there. But once I show them don't glass there, start getting this angle, and it clicks. And I'll tell you, 2 guys you gave me about 6 weeks ago, I gave them this lesson. They went out the next day, and they found 4 bucks in the unit they're hunting, and they called me, and it was static. They said, it was exactly what you said. We watched them go around to the northwest side. We went around there and found them, and I said, it's that simple. And they're both good glassers. But once they learn how to change tactics and start looking in the bedding area, and I tell them, if you're not looking in the shade, you're not looking at the right place. You've got to get the angle to look at that shade, because those deer are not going to lay out that open in sun very long.
Duwane, after a few of our podcasts, I get a bunch of messages saying, are you sure Duwane doesn't mean the northeast slope? He keeps saying the northwest slope. And I've always glassed north and east-facing slopes. So in other words, the shadiest areas. You say northwest slope, just to make sure I'm clearly understanding you. Literally, you want those slopes, what you're looking at is slopes that face the northwest?
Yes, every mountain range is different, Jay, and it might not be identically the west side, but it's the shady side of a ridge. And so I use the northwest and the southeast on purpose, because if I start confusing it, they already confused. So I explain to them, look, the sun's coming up in the east. You see where the sun hits? And they'll say, yeah, it's on the other side of each one of these deals. That's how simple it is. And so I call it the northwest. And in some places, it's not. It might be a little bit of the east. But for the most part, about 90% of it is the west side of a ridge.
So what you're saying is the guys that have come, that have listened to the podcast, they can look through the binoculars and they can pick deer out. But you're saying it's kind of a game of percentages, and they're strictly not looking in the deer where the highest percentages of deer are holding, which you are saying as soon as the first hour goes by, start shifting your focus to glassing into the shady pockets and shady areas, and then that also translates into the afternoon. If you're looking with the sun at your back, yes, if deer pop up, you can see them right at last light. But for the 3 or 4 hours before the sun goes down, you're saying use your time to glass all of the shady pockets, and you'll be looking into a higher percentage area of where deer are holding. Is that kind of the crux of what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying, and that's exactly what I try to teach these gentlemen that come, is that the reason we see so many deer, they said, I've never seen so many deer. I said, it's because we're looking where the deer are in the morning and where they are in the middle of the day, and in the evening, I reverse it. I said, it's just reversed of what we did. At 4 o'clock, I said, you start looking at those northwest cuts, and they're going to be coming back out to the feed. So it's just reversed, and I show them both ways what's going to happen. once they start getting the format, and I tell them all the time, it's the same as desert mule deer. When you're driving out there in the flats, a 30-inch deer is not going to lay in the sun at 10 o'clock in the morning. He's going to lay on the northwest side of a palo verde or a mesquite tree. So if you don't have that angle at about 9 to look back in there, you're going to miss those deer. So that's what I try to teach them. You always try to have the angles that you can look into the shade, especially in the desert.
Let's talk a little bit about taking that same approach in more timbered country, say like the Kaibab or even some of the stuff up here in Colorado or Utah or Idaho. Does, the angle of the dangle, does looking into the shade change, when you're looking for mule deer in more forested areas?
It changes drastically. And the reason is if you've got pines and it's shady on both sides, a lot of times they won't play that game. They'll just stay in the pines. But what I have found, if it's oaks, they lay on that shady side in the oaks, and that's been the northwest cuts for us. And if they're laying that side, they're very vulnerable to kill, and that's one of the things that we're doing. And they also do that same thing in the aspens. They lay in those thick aspens, literally on that northwest little cuts. And some of the best places that we're hunting are just little rolling hills that nobody looks at, and it's just shaded. And we've killed a half a dozen gigantic bucks where nobody will look in those little pockets.
You've also talked about the angle of the dangle, about the roll of the hill, and whether you glass at the top of the hill or at the roll. Talk a little bit about positioning yourself on a hill so that you can be able to see the whole canyon or see the hill across that you're looking at.
Well, everybody wants to sit down and glass, and including myself, because I'm a lot more steadier when I sit down to glass. But what I found is that you have to pick the binoculars up and move just to get that right angle. And what I mean by that is, and I did it this morning with the guy, I said, look, if we walk up here 100 yards, we'll have a different angle. And you walk up here, and we didn't glass 10 seconds, and I said, there's a buck. And I said, that 100 yards down there, we missed him because we did not have that angle. And so what you're saying is the little rolls like that, I pick up and I move 20, 30, 40 yards, and I look, and then I pick up 20, 30, 40 yards, and I keep looking, and I keep changing the angle the whole time, because a lot of times, Luke was glassing with me a couple years ago, and he said, Dad, I got a buck. And I said, you do? And it's the exact situation you're talking about, just a little roll hill, and there's a bunch of blowdowns. And I said, Luke, I can't see that deer. I said, where are you talking? So he said, so I had to get his binoculars. If I moved left 2 feet or right 2 feet, I couldn't see that deer. And all you could do is see his neck and head. And in fact, my son-in-law put that on my webpage. And if you look on it, you can see this buck laying there, and he's turned his head. And we killed this deer. He scored 192. And he was in the angle. If we would not have had that, we'd have never found him.
Duwane, what's going on around your house? You live in southern Arizona down there by San Manuel. How does the desert look? How has the monsoon rain been? What are feed conditions there in that country?
Well, the monsoons weren't as normal here as they were in Unit 1. It was like we got a couple real serious rains, and we didn't get any rains. But the growth, I think, was unbelievable because of all of the winter and the feed that come out. The acorns up there are just unbelievable. I was just up there, and there are millions of them. And so that's because of a wet winter, and the deer just gorging themselves on those acorns. I mean, I seen that. They're just, every deer we've seen today was, they're just vacuuming those acorns up. So it's going to be the same probably in the Kaibab, and I think it's going to be anywhere that there is any of that. I think that the food's just going to be unbelievable, to be very honest with you.
So for these guys that are going out on these junior hunts and then these October Tuesday hunts that are starting out, would you say that this year it might be a good time to focus more on the oaks than normal?
I think so, yes. I think that's exactly what I did today. is I noticed that the acorns in early summer, when you could just see them under like pins on a head of there are thousands of them, so you know they're going to start dropping, and once they start dropping, the deer are just going to just sit there and just hardly move at all, just vacuum all those acorns up that hit the ground. So that's exactly what I would do, is be trying to play around those acorn trees.
This year, these early hunts, both in the Kaibab and the Coues deer and some of the early mule deer hunts in Arizona, fall on a new moon, a dark moon. How do you see that playing out for that first, October Coues deer season and up on the Kaibab, that new moon?
Well, I have a theory, Jay, and I tell them it's just like the Super Bowl. Whatever you're dealt, you got to hunt. And so when it's a full moon, generally those deer lay down earlier. But on the reverse, Jay, they also get up earlier to feed. So if it's just the reverse of that, they're not going to lay down as early if it's dark. And that's what we have come out to. They'll stay up and feed for another 20 or 30 minutes longer than normal. So it's either one or it's other, but either way it goes, you're going to have an opportunity to try to kill them in the morning if it's dark, and if it's full moon, they're going to get up in the evening earlier. That's what's been my experience.
How do you anticipate the Kaibab, the early hunt, going this year?
I think it's going to be unbelievable. We killed a really nice buck up there on the archery season, and seen some unbelievable deer. So I just think it's going to. I mean, Jay, you've seen what they did in the Strip. I mean, they just killed deer up there. They're just ungodly anywhere in the world, and I just don't think that the Kaibab is too much off of that. I'm not saying there's 300-inch deer up there, but I think there's going to be a lot of deer killed up there in the 220 to 230s.
Obviously, the late hunt, you get those deer that are rutting and going crazy up there. I assume you are betting that the late hunt on the Kaibab is going to be a year to remember.
I think so. I think it's going to be. We were on the late hunt last year, and on the last day, I seen 40 bucks that were over 160 and up. And me and some of the guys that work with me, and we've seen several bucks are in that 180 to 190 to bumping right up to 200-inch. And they, all those deer had to carry over. So if they picked up 20 points, that's why I was telling you that I think it's going to be 220, 230, 240-inch bucks that are going to be killed there. I think that you're going to have a lot of common people that kill those deer, because I think there's great numbers of those deer that made it.
One of the tricks up on the Kaibab, and we've talked about it before on other podcasts, there's all these different ranges of elevation and vegetation on the Kaibab, and the deer migration happens, sometimes according to the weather, according to, how cold it is, what the vegetation's doing, and they move with the weather. Give a few tips for guys up there that maybe aren't going guided and feel a little bit overwhelmed about the Kaibab, as big as it is, and how do they find deer at the different zones, at the different levels of elevation?
That's a good question, Jay, because I keep an ear on the Kaibab. I see what the temperature is, and I see that it's going to be 15 degrees next week. And so that tells me that the food on top is froze. And those are the small forbs. That's what those deer eat up there. They eat all small forbs that's in the grass. And when it freezes, I have found that those deer will start to migrate. And they start moving. It's just something that God gave them. They know it's time to move. And the does, fawns, small bucks will start to move. But a lot of the big bucks will start to move too. They don't move as fast as those deer do, but they start dropping down the next level. The next level is the oaks. They'll fall into the oaks, and if there's no oaks, they drop on back down to the cliff rows and on down to the sage. But this year, I think they're going to hang up in the oaks because there's acorns, like I just told you, everywhere. And they'll usually stay in that acorns all the way into the late hunt because there's so many oak basins up there that the deer can't clean it all up. And then what usually stops them is when the snow comes, it covers it up, then they drop down. That's what's been my experience. So you don't want to stay too much on top of that mountain. If it gets cold, and my son-in-law Nick said it's going to be 15 and the high is going to be 51, but it's going to be in the 20s every morning, those deer will move automatically and start dropping down to the next food level.
Some of those deer, Duwane, give the listeners that aren't familiar with the Kaibab how far they will travel in their migration.
They go 40 miles. Is what they go, and that's about what it is from the top of the mountain all the way down into the So Watch, jump up, slide, all that country, and then on the east side they'll fall all the way down into the Coxcombs and all the way down way out there in that sage. And so it's a lot longer than people think. And what's really surprising to me, they'll do it in about 3 days. Once they take off, they take off. And I didn't really realize that. And where I come up with that figure is that we've been at jump up and slide and all these countries and no deer, not a track, and go down there in 3 days and there's hundreds of deer. And it's an eye opener how fast. So, we always think that the deer, are just going to walk, I think they walk all night and rest during the day, and then I walk all night. They do that about 3 times, and it's over. They're there.
Duwane, you have right around your house, not only do you have coos deer, but you have desert mule deer. I get a lot of questions for guys that are hunting coos, and then I get questions about guys that are hunting mule deer down in some of those southern Arizona units. What are some tips that you can give mule deer hunters that are hunting kind of in those 32, 31, 33, 34A, some of those units for mule deer?
Well, the best tip I can give you is you got to have 2 people. I think it's very difficult to stalk those deer by yourself. Once you leave the mountain and start down there to those deer, if you don't have help, more than not, you're going to, I call it stalk and spook. And I think that's probably more important than anything else is to have help with you that can tell you one more ridge over or talk to you, give you hand signals or whatever you want to use to get into those deer. The thing that I have found in January on that archery hunt, if that's what you're talking about, Jay, is they love barrel cactus tops and they love cholla. They love those two fruit, and both of those come off in the last part of December, the whole part of January. So when I'm glassing and I see a big cholla patch, thick cholla patch, or I see a lot of barrel cactuses, man, I slow down and pay attention because they love those 2 things.
When you start talking about over-the-counter deer, Arizona is one of those states that, you can come from out of state, or even people that live in Arizona can buy a tag over the counter and hunt during the peak of the rut for mule deer in the desert and coos deer in the desert. And I get people asking me all the time, what unit should I go to? And I kind of smirk because, in my opinion, for the mule deer specifically, and most of the questions people are asking about over-the-counter mule deer, especially non-residents, they want to come hunt muleys. I've found that there's units that may be a little better than others, but the reality is if you're in that right zone and you're kind of down on that desert floor, any of the units that you pick can be pretty good. My question for you would be, as someone that's lived down there as long as you have and been around those deer, 40, 50 years, are there any units that jump out at you for mule deer that you think are better than others?
Well, Jay, I'm going to tell you, you actually answered the question. I'm going to be as honest as I can be. I think you have to have an area that's flat, that those deer can survive through the rifle season. And that's what makes all the units that you talked about devastating. great. That's why there's always big bucks. I think that they can get out and see a Palo Verdes or mesquites, and they're unhuntable pretty much until the rut. And then in the rut, they come out of that stuff to chase does. And I get that same question from guys that call me that want to do it on their own, and I tell them there's really not a magic place. And I said, because I go to about a half a dozen different units. I hunt this one this day, I hunt this one the next day, and then, my Lord, there's a gigantic deer, could be right by a road. Last year, one of the biggest deers that we seen, and he's way over 200 inches, Jay, he was within 300 yards of a main road, but you couldn't see him because of all the Palo Verdes, and we got up on a knob, was glassing down in there, and him and three other bucks way over 180 were in that zone, rutting about 10 does. And there it is. So that's just one of those little holes that we have found over the years. It's right off a highway, but it's flat for 30 miles, and those deer can survive. You can't hunt them with a rifle there. I think if you're in an area that the rifle hunters have a chance to kill the 2 points and the 3 points, and the deer as they progress up, they never get a chance to grow up. But if you got a place that they can grow up out there and get 4, 5, 6 years old, you got a chance to kill a monster anywhere around Tucson. 37B, 37A, 36A, 36B, all those zones around there have gigantic deer.
Yeah, and I tell people, too, like if you're looking in western Arizona and you're looking at like 42, 41, 44, 43, I mean, what I tell guys is find desert knobs, cone little shaped, little jagged peaks, get up on those cone peaks, and then look out into those sandy bottom washes that are, choked with ironwood trees, Palo Verde trees. And, if you're coming from out of state, you're going to come and think there's no way a deer lives there. But if you would just, climb for 30 minutes or 45 minutes up to a tall, jagged peak where you can look literally 360 degrees out onto the desert floor, and then once you get up there, focus on, just look with your naked eye and look for those drainages where they're just choked with brush. That's where they're going to be. That's where they're going to bed. And then they'll just branch out just a little bit and feed, and then they'll come back in those sandy bottom washes. And, I mean, how many times, Duwane, have you been quail hunting and you're out there in just a complete flats and you're looking around and there's just deer tracks all over? And where are they? They're right next to the thick mesquite, the thick Palo Verdes, the thick ironwoods, the thicker brush that's in those sandy bottom washes. That's where you see all the deer tracks. And, people are looking for the magic ticket or the magic unit in Arizona. Man, I think there's, 8 to 10, maybe 12 units that you could pick and have just about as much success as any other.
Well, everything you said is exactly what we do. I mean, the units you're talking about, the 43, 41s, all those units down there is the exact same thing. I mean, they're big flats, and you have a cone that you're talking about. You can get up and glass out there, and you are right. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been quail hunting and a gigantic mule deer will jump out and run 2 bounds, and you'll never see that deer again. But you come back in a rut, and you got a chance to see that deer. And so I think that's exactly right. You hit it right on the head.
I remember last year you were saying that the quail hatch was very, very poor. How is this year looking?
I think it's unbelievable. And I'm actually flabbergasted that there were that many carryover, because last year's probably the first year I hadn't killed a quail in my life. And there were just very few birds, so I left them alone. But I've been out time and time again, and praise God, their birds have exploded. I mean, it's just uncanny that how they have recovered. And I seen 11 cubbies the other day and just messing around in about 2 hours, and I was just excited to death. So thank God we're going to have some fun.
Duwane, I always love having you on the podcast. Want to give you a chance to give a few last-minute tips to those guys out there, the deer hunters out there that are about to hit the woods, so whether it be in Arizona or all across the West, whether it be mule deer or Coues deer. give a few more tips that you think are important, or anything that we didn't touch on today.
Well, I think the most important thing is you have to have a great tripod that you can stand up with, and you have to have a good quality pair of binoculars. If you have that too, there's enough information from guys like you that put these podcasts on, that have wonderful people that are very sharp on how to pick up. Instead of having to learn to do it on your own, they can listen to some of the things that you put out and save them a lot of time. And I think that's probably most important in all, is those things there. But there are a lot of people, Jay, that are starving for information. And I thought I knew that until I got on your podcast, and I've probably done 45 or 50 glassing lessons since the last time you and I were on. And every one of them, when they just thank me, they say, I've been trying to get this, and I've seen on Jay's podcast that you give lessons. And I want to try to help people. I think that's part of passing it on. And I give free glassing lessons to children. I had a young boy today, and I don't charge the parents for children. I think that we owe it to those kids to learn the right way to have fun out there instead of not have fun. And if they can learn how to glass from somebody like me and make it fun, then I think we'll pass that on. And I think that's probably more important than anything else, is that find your kids a pair of good binoculars. And I'll give you one more tip, Jay, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, but my boy, when he was 10, had no idea about glassing, and he didn't want to glass. And I've since have told this story to these clients, because they told me my son doesn't like this. And I said, then pay him. And they said, what do you mean, Mr. Adams? I said, look, if you're going to be a welder, they pay you. If you're going to be an electrician, there's an apprentice program. And I said, my son was in that category 35 years ago. And I said, so I told Luke, I said, I'll give you $1 for every deer you find. He said, what do you mean, Dad? I said, if you see a deer with your binoculars, not with your eyes, I'll give you $1. And he found 6 deer that day. I gave him $6, and he flipped in a New York minute after that. And every day,
money talks.
Money talks, and I tell people that. I said, why not? If your son is not interested in doing this, I said, pay him. So I said, they said, pay him what? I said, and I use that illustration, Jay. I said, every trade in America, they don't train you free. They pay you. And I said, so if you wanted your boy to enjoy yourself, pay him. I said, and pay him, and don't be a cheapskate. So now, as a grandfather, I pay my grandchildren $10 a deer. That's what I do. And it works. It works, and I got 2 grandsons they get their binoculars, and I'm telling you, they say, Pop, now, how do you do this? They're 7 and 6 years old. And I said, okay, look at that hill, and I try, and then I'll put the deer on. I see him. I see the deer. Does that one count? I said, that one counts. And give them a couple of $20 bills, and guess what? They every time now they want to come. They want to come because they're an incentive. As Luke got older, I gave Luke $50 a day to go with me, and plus I said, I'll give you $1 a deer, Luke. So the incentive was there, and my son's a killer now. He's a and
That's
so
awesome.
what's happening? It's the truth. My boy, and I forgot to tell people about that until I had these guys come on the glassing lessons, and they said, I've got a son that won't do it. I said, then pay him. He says, you know what, Mr. Adams, I'm going home and I'm going to pay him. I'm going to do that. I said, tell him $10 a deer. I guarantee you money is a great incentive to pay attention.
That's a great tip, man. That's a great tip. Well, Duwane, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I want to give you a chance to let people know how they can reach out to you and follow and chat with you, what have you. So will you do that, please?
You bet. If you want to give me a call, my phone number is 520-385-4995. I have a web page, Duwane Adams Hunting, and look at that. And if you're interested in a guided hunt on the Kaibab or Coos deer, even if you don't have a tag, can't hire a guide, give me a call. I would love to talk to you, and maybe I could give you some advice that I like to help people. And if you've got a tag and need a map, we draw detail maps and try to put people in good places because we need everybody's vote to beat these Democrats back. So we all try to help everybody to get this right so we can all have fun out there. But if you got any kind of questions, I have glassing lessons, as you've heard me talk about. I get $300 per person, and children are free, and we'd love to give you glassing lessons.
Right on, man. I'll link it up in the show notes as well, and have a great time up on the Kaibab, and I'll be looking for your client success, and I always enjoy talking to you. God bless you, okay?
God bless you. God bless you. Bye.
All right, buddy. Take care.